Hello and welcome back to the Underground. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you guys had a great weekend. And I think this is going to be a pretty cool episode. I'm excited for it. Those of you that are into AP psychology, I think you'll enjoy this one. I want to give you an approach to reading Frankenstein from a psychological perspective, mostly from a Freudian perspective. And the reason for this, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein before Sigmund Freud was even born, but she has a vision that anticipates almost everything that Freud came up with. She's very, very interesting to me. I think if we're looking at her romantic vision of reality, what we see is this notion that as much as we try to be intellectual creatures, rational creatures, scientific creatures, we really are driven by our emotions and our passions. And during the Age of Reason, during the 1700s, you guys will notice that that Walton's letters are all written like 17 dash, right? Sometime in the 18th century, sometime in the 1700s. There was this big hope that mankind could make the world a better place simply by being more rational, being more logical and reasonable, right? That if we could bury our emotions, we'd somehow be better people. Mary Shelley seems to suggest to us that if we don't have a very clear understanding of our emotions, if we don't have a very clear understanding of who we are as people, what makes us tick, what kind of grief we've experienced in our lives, what drives us emotionally, then these sort of buried emotions, these repressed emotions, are going to manifest themselves in very dark and disturbing ways. This is total Freud before Freud's even born, right? Freud tells us that anytime we experience trauma, every time we experience a conflict between the self and society, we bury this all in our childhood. Childhood becomes our destiny. And then we need very expensive psychoanalysis to figure out what it is that happened to us in our childhoods that's made us the weirdos that we are today. So I think Mary Shelley is fascinating for this reason, and I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about a few ways we could read the letters section. Well, not so much the letters, but a little bit of the letters, but mainly the first 6 chapters with a psychoanalytic lens. And my hope is for the rest of the book, if you like looking at Victor from a psychological perspective, if you like looking at the monster from the psychological perspective, that you can continue to do this. I'll give you a lot of quotes today, a lot of stuff to look at. I think that'll help you set up the pattern so that you can do this on your own down the line. Okay, so the first big concept I want to talk about is the Oedipus complex in Frankenstein. And Sigmund Freud believed, this is a strange one, that all young boys want to kill their fathers and marry their mothers. And this sounds like an insane theory. He based it on Sophocles' play Oedipus Rex, but the concept here, maybe it sort of makes a little sense. Here's the idea. When you are a baby boy, all you have is an id. All you have is a desire for your whims to be fulfilled. And the person who takes care of everything that you want, especially back in the 1800s, is your mother. So if you need to be changed, mom changes you. If you need to be comforted, mom comforts you. If you need to be fed, mom feeds you. Any need that you have, you cry and mom takes care of for you. And let's imagine dad comes home from work. What happens then? Well, suddenly mom goes and pays attention to dad, and you're just left there with a poopy diaper crying, wishing you had some food and cleanliness and all that kind of stuff. So because you don't have a superego yet, because you haven't really developed a conscience or an understanding of the rules of society, what happens is you start to wish, wow, if dad were out of the picture, then mom would be all mine, right? And as you become a toddler, as you learn language, you start to develop a superego. You develop, an understanding of what the needs of society are, and you start feeling incredibly guilty for the fact that you want to be with mom all the time and you want dad dead. So what do? Well, your superego helps your ego develop, your sense of self, and you recognize it's wrong for me to want to be with mom all the time. It's wrong for me to want to kill dad. So I know that mom likes dad because of his dadliness. So if I start copying my dad, if I behave like him, if I can somehow take his place, then then down the line, someone like mom will devote herself to me. And this is, Freud's vision of marriage, which is a very creepy idea that when we marry people, we're looking for people to take the place of our caregivers when we were children, right? Someday I'll have someone like mommy all for myself. Okay, creepy theory. But if we think about this issue in terms of Mary Shelley, obviously she can't have an Oedipus complex. She might have an Electra complex, which is the female version. But she was constantly in a battle where she was trying to understand how to make her own father love her. She was constantly met with disapproval and constantly trying to impress him. So I think, this is an interesting thing. And when we think about her family in general, everyone in her family is sort of loosely adopted. Everyone in her family plays multiple roles. There are a lot of strange family issues, and I think they play out in this relationship Victor has with his family. So let's talk about his dad. His dad has an interesting relationship to his mother. We know that, his dad has an interesting relationship to his wife, aka Frankenstein's mother. We know that Caroline Beaufort was the daughter of one of his best friends, and his best friend decided when he lost all of his money that rather than bear the shame of that with his friends and ask for help, that he would just run away with his daughter and live in poverty. And it's very funny that the men in this book, this is kind of like Victor Frankenstein too, when they have a feeling, they more or less fall apart. Unless your name's Henry Clerval, he's okay with his feelings. But yeah, this guy, for some reason, is too embarrassed to ask his friends for help or let anybody know about his poverty. But he's not too embarrassed to make his daughter beg for money and, do whatever she can to earn an income and take care of him while he just lies around wishing he weren't poor. I don't quite get that. It kind of makes me impressed with Caroline. But anyways, Caroline, really, if you think about this relationship, starts out almost like a niece to Alphonse Frankenstein. She's not someone who really should be an object of romantic interest. And really, when he finally tracks down his friend, he finds that his friend is dead and she's there all alone. And he adopts her as a daughter and basically takes care of her like a daughter for 2 years. And over that process, they fall in love and then they get married. By today's standards, we would call this pretty creepy. Alphonse, I'd imagine, is like probably about 45 to 50 when all of this happens. He's already lived a long life as a bachelor. And he marries a girl who is probably in her early 20s, maybe even younger than that. Maybe she's like 19 or so when they get married. It's awkward. So what do? The two of them basically decide they're going to travel all around Europe for several years. And Victor is born during these travels through Italy and France and all over the place. And Victor talks about this time as being incredibly happy, incredibly wonderful. At the same time, this sounds like a middle-aged guy going through a midlife crisis, partying his rear end off all across Europe. I'm not quite sure what kind of a childhood Victor actually gets to have while his parents are just out having a great time all over the place, right? Spending down some of the family inheritance. Victor does talk a little bit about his father's character. In chapter 1, he says, "There was a sense of justice in my father's upright mind that he should approve highly to love strongly." This is when Victor is talking about why he loves Caroline. And it's an interesting one. There was a sense of justice in my father's upright mind that he should approve highly to love strongly. Think about this if it is not about Caroline. Victor says it's only just to love somebody if they're worthy of that love. And then he goes on to kind of say, well, my mother was worthy of this love, so my dad loved her, and that's a sign of justice in my dad. Does Victor feel loved by his dad? Does Victor feel like his dad approves of his character and then therefore loves him? When you're a little kid, you don't exactly have a character to approve of. You're just kind of like this unformed, beautiful little reflection of God's love, but you have like a personality, but you don't have like ethics or morality or anything like that. You're just a little squeaker. So this is an interesting kind of question. Also, is this Frankenstein's vision that in order to love somebody, you have to approve of the person, that love is highly conditional? Does Victor actually love his own father? Does he approve of his father or not? My read on Victor is that he's in competition with his father. When his father says, don't read Cornelius Agrippa, don't read Paracelsus, this is all trash, Victor's reaction isn't to obey his father or to say, wow, my father must be right, or my father knows what he's talking about, he's a syndic. Instead, his vision is, well, I'm going to read it anyways, and I'm going to learn all the secrets of alchemy and right? I'm going to go blow up some trees. I'm going to play with lightning. I'm going to go to Ingolstadt, and I'm going to learn how to reanimate the dead. And that, I think this is an attack on his father, right? I think there's anger that Victor feels toward his own father, and we see this come out a few times. Here's an interesting one. His father, when he sends him off to Ingolstadt, really, really, really wants Victor to keep in touch. And you guys know that Victor doesn't send any notice home for 2 years. His dad specifically asked him to. In chapter 4, he says, Victor says, the same feelings which made me neglect the scenes around me caused me also to forget those friends who were so many miles absent and whom I had not seen for so long a time. I knew my silence disquieted them, and I well remembered the words of my father. I know that while you are pleased with yourself, you will think of us with affection, and we shall hear regularly from you. You must pardon me if I regard any interruption in your correspondence as a proof that your other duties are equally neglected. Victor doesn't think about his family for 2 years. He doesn't think about his dad. He doesn't think about Elizabeth. He doesn't think about Henry. He's completely surprised when Henry shows up. Why this complete neglect of his father? Why this complete neglect of other people that he loves? To me, we might be able to read this as a type of Oedipal rage, a type of, aversion to his own father. And then we get to Caroline Beaufort Frankenstein, his mother. Caroline is, she seems like a nice person, right? She seems like somebody who devoted herself to her father and then who is very devoted to her family. And she just seems like she's wonderful. And every time Victor talks about her or Elizabeth, we'll hit that in a second, but she's always glowing. There's always light coming from her. There's still some interesting stuff, though. For one, the age differences is sort of like you've got Alphonse, who probably ought to be Victor's grandfather, who's with his mother. There's this massive gap in their ages. We've got 3 generations covered in what should be 2 generations. One of the first things Victor tells us about his childhood, he says, oh, it was amazing, it was wonderful. He speaks in hyperbole. He always talks about everything being the best or the worst. And you always see this with tragic heroes. Tragic heroes cannot walk a middle ground. I had the happiest childhood ever. I am chief in misery. Fate has accursed me to be the worst person ever, right? Or no one has ever accomplished what I've accomplished. You never hear a tragic hero just say, oh yeah, I've got a small accounting firm, I do all right. It's always just, I am the king, or I am the lowest of the low, right? But after Victor talks about how he is the happiest childhood anyone could imagine, he says, "For a long time, I was their only care. My mother had much desire to have a daughter, but I continued their single offspring." So for 5 years, Victor is the only child. He gets to enjoy all the love of his parents, but at the same time, he knows that while he uh, is a boy, that his mom really wants a girl. And this might really mess with Victor. We'll talk about this one in a little bit, but the idea of asexual reproduction, this idea that Victor ends up being both mother and father, right? That in creating life without a female partner, he's taken on the role of both the male and the female, right? He has somehow embraced a big part of the feminine role into his own identity. Is this because the pressure his mother puts on him, being disappointed that he is not a girl? And Caroline wants a girl so badly that she goes out and when they're traveling in Italy, she rescues Elizabeth Lavenza from this home of dark-haired Italian peasants. And a lot of you on the comment board have pointed out, wow, that really seems like racist or xenophobic or anti-Italian or something, but why does the pretty little blonde girl get pulled out of poverty and all of the other kids get to starve because they have darker hair and don't seem as noble? How come the girl who has a nobleman father who is just away fighting in a revolution is the one who is saved? I shouldn't say he's away, he's dead after fighting in a revolution. But yeah, how come she's the one who gets saved? And this might be because Caroline has symptoms of narcissism. It could be that Caroline Beaufort is madly in love with her own identity. She's one of these people who loves her own heroism, loves her own look, right? She identifies with the kids that are living in poverty who remind her of her, the most beautiful one, right? She doesn't really identify with the other children. She doesn't even say, hey, this kid is not yours by blood, these other ones are. Why don't I give you money to help with the other kids and I'll take this one off your hands, right? It's really just like, oh, her dad was a nobleman, right? Okay, I'll take her. So, she views, there's something in here where she sees herself and, gets her own clone, right? And when we think about when Victor goes to make the monster, Victor, in many, many ways, is trying to make a reproduction of himself. So there's some stuff here that seems innocent, but maybe Victor's picking up on this narcissism from his own mother. I've noticed that Victor is constantly hungry to be mothered. Nowadays, we would probably diagnose him with somatic symptom disorder. Freud might have said neurosis. But somatic symptom disorder is basically like there isn't a clear mental cause for a physical ailment. In Victor's case, it seems like anytime he has a feeling, he passes out for several months and needs to be nursed back to health. He just loves this idea of pushing himself till he is broken and then having somebody take care of him, right? He's got to just lie in a bed while someone devotes his life or her life to him, usually his life. So it's kind of a strange thing here. But there's this hunger, it seems like Victor has for mothering, even though every time he talks about his mother's a saint, his mother's the greatest person in the world. Somehow Victor is endlessly hungry for a mother's love who, even though he says that his mother was the ideal mother. So where's the disconnect? Is it that she is a wonderful person and he just is incredibly greedy? Or is it that she's a wonderful person and he doesn't want to say anything bad about her, but he also feels kind of neglected? It's interesting. One of the things I love about Mary Shelley is that she doesn't have people editorializing on Victor's behavior other than the monster, who's a very, very big critic of Victor's. But for the most part, nobody's there saying, hey, this isn't right, Victor. Hey, this is a weird thing, Victor. Victor just gets to tell his story and all the weird stuff just hangs there, all the inconsistencies. Wait, if your mom was so great, why is it that you are so attached to like trying to impress her and get her back and all this kind of stuff. Now, the part where it gets really strange with Caroline is when she brings Elizabeth into the house. Um, Here's Victor's first description of Elizabeth living with the family. When my father returned, this is chapter 1. When my father returned from Milan, he found playing with me in the hall of our villa a child fairer than pictured cherub. There's that hyperbole again, right? Oh, she's more beautiful than the most beautiful angel. A creature who seemed to shed radiance from her looks, and whose form and motions were lighter than the chamois of the hills. So here's this very hyperbolic language again. It's interesting he calls her a creature. It's the same term that he uses for the monster. And then we get this very, very strange, there we go. We get this very strange phrase that Victor uses to describe Elizabeth. They consulted their village priest, and the result was that Elizabeth Lavenza became the inmate of my parents' house, my more than sister, the beautiful and adored companion of all occupations and my pleasures. Few interesting things to unpack in this quote. First of all, the inmate of my parents' house. Oh, she began to live here, but there's like kind of almost this word tied to prison, being a prisoner. My more than sister. So depending on how you look at Elizabeth, we'll see this in the next quote. She's either Victor's plaything, his property, his future bride, his cousin, or his sister. So that is a lot. That's a very ambiguous relationship that he has. Not only that, but she's a clone of his mother. So there's some heavy Oedipal stuff right there. Your mom basically creates or brings into the home somebody who's supposed to be a reflection of her and who is supposed to be your future bride. Yeah. In a way, Victor is almost railroaded into this Oedipal relationship with his own mother. Let's see, fitting what I just said, chapter 1, Victor's mother says, I have a pretty present for my Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it. So the first thing, she's a present. And when on the morrow she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift, there's gift, right? I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally and looked upon Elizabeth as mine. There's the ownership. Mine to protect, love, and cherish. Protect, love, and cherish. When do people make vows to protect, love, and cherish? A wedding. Wow, that's a little pressure to put on a little 5-year-old kid, right? All praises bestowed on her I received as made to a possession of my own. Ooh, this is narcissism, right? Because here Victor basically says anytime people give Elizabeth a compliment, he's the one who gets the praise because he owns her. That's very narcissistic, right? We called each other familiarly by the name of cousin, which back then just meant, hey, we're related. It didn't necessarily mean that you were the child of, wait, sorry. You weren't like just a nephew, right? Of your cousin's parent. Okay, so anyways, what else do we have? No word, no expression could body forth the kind of relation in which she stood to me, my more than sister, since to death she was to be mine only. So yeah, till death do us part, more of this marriage kind of language here. And she's mine, right? So anything that people love about Elizabeth, he takes credit for because she belongs to him. Okay, and then Victor's mother ends up dying nursing Elizabeth back to health. So if his feelings toward her aren't confused enough already, he now must blame Elizabeth on some level for his mother's death. So there's got to be this level where he wants to distance himself from Elizabeth because he's lost his mother, whom he loves. So there would be this feeling of like resentment or anger toward Elizabeth, except, but on her deathbed, this is chapter 3, his mom joins Victor and Elizabeth's hands together and says, "My firmest hopes of future happiness were placed on the prospect of your union. This expectation will now be the consolation of your father." Oh, great. So my dying happiness, the whole thing that I've lived for was so that you two could one day be married. And the only chance your dad has at happiness is if you two get married now. This expectation will now be the consolation of your father. Elizabeth, my love, you must supply my place to my younger children. Wow. Okay. So now she is the mother to Victor's other siblings. Dun, dun, dun. Right. It's not only that you have to marry Victor, but you have to be a mother to his siblings, which basically means his mom too. Alas, I regret that I am taken from you, and happy and beloved as I have been, is it not hard to quit you all? But these are not thoughts befitting me. I will endeavor to resign myself cheerfully to death, and will indulge a hope of meeting you in another world. Okay, that sounds nice, but listen to the narcissism here. She doesn't say, I don't know what I'm going to do without you. I'm going to miss you guys so much. I hope to see you again soon in the next life. She says, I regret that I am taken from you. Right? Oh, I'm sorry you're going to lose me. That's kind of a narcissistic approach, right? I'm sorry, you could say, I'm sorry that I'm putting you through all this, right? Or I'm sorry that you have to learn about death at such a young age. But no, I regret that I am taken from you, right? And happy and beloved as I have been, even though I know that like you love me so much, which is weird. Is it not hard to quit you all? So she's saying it's hard to leave you knowing how much you loved me, but she's not saying it's hard to leave you knowing how much I love you. Dun, dun, dun. Kind of a narcissistic phrasing there. But these are not thoughts befitting me. Ooh, right? These thoughts are beneath the dignity of Caroline Frankenstein. Victor talks a lot like that too. Okay, Victor goes on to talk about Elizabeth, and he says, never was she so enchanting as at this time when she recalled the sunshine of her smiles and spent them upon us. As Elizabeth tries to take care of the family and put on this false front of happiness, and kind of take the place of his mother, this is when she's the most attractive to him. At the same time, he still has to be feeling some sort of anxiety over the fact that his mom is dead because she sacrificed herself to save Elizabeth. And here's probably the creepiest part of what we've read so far in these first 6 chapters. It's the dream that Victor has after the monster comes to life. And basically he like passes out and goes into the bed again. Check out this dream in terms of Freudian stuff. I thought I saw Elizabeth in the bloom of health walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her. But as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. Okay, let's take this one apart a little bit. I thought I saw Elizabeth in the bloom of health walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. So this whole time, instead of running off to Ingolstadt, Victor ought to have just been pursuing his relationship with Elizabeth and starting to like prepare a family and all that kind of stuff. But he sees her, he imagines seeing her on the streets outside his college in Ingolstadt, and he's all excited, and he embraces her and gives her a kiss, right? Which is what you do at the end of a marriage ceremony. But when he is holding her and kissing her, she basically becomes livid with the hue of death. She becomes gray and dead, and her features start changing. And then he believes that he's holding the corpse of his dead mother. So he's absolutely conflating his mother and Elizabeth. And there's a big question, why is Victor so interested in bringing this monster to life in the first place? Why does he want to create life? Um, One of the big things that we'll talk about in a little bit is the idea that he wants to cure death. And we can kind of guess that the reason for that is because the death of his mother is so painful to him. Rather than dealing with the grief of his own mother, he decides, I'm going to cure death and then I can bring my mom back to life. Although he never says I'm going to bring my mom back to life. I'm conjecturing here. But why does he care so much about ending death, right? His biggest experience with death is with his own mother. And in this dream, his sense of romantic attraction to Elizabeth, who would, be the person he ought to be bringing life into the world with, it becomes conflated with this obsession he has with his mother's dead body. Not only that, a shroud enveloped her form, right? So we've got something like a veil, like a wedding dress. And I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. Freud would call this a phallic image. I'm not going to explain what that means. Have fun with that. It's gross. Okay. Let's shift gears here. Let's talk now about narcissism and Victor's God complex, which kind of the same sort of thing. So narcissism is this very strong feeling of self-worth, the sense of being very important, very grandiose. What we find with people who have narcissistic personality disorder is that they want to be the center of attention. They want everybody to know how much they've accomplished. They want everybody's adoration. They want to be the talk of other people, but they also don't invest anything in relationships. They're very vampiric when it comes to relationships. They don't actually give what they take from a relationship. And if we look at Victor frequently equates himself with God or is trying to take on godlike powers. He's neglectful of the people around him, but he still expects their praise and adulation. He's not particularly empathetic, and he's always aspiring to just be grander, greater than everybody else. He's frequently in competition. We see with his father. We see with his professors, particularly Professor Krempe. He likes Waldman a little bit because Waldman praises him, where Krempe says, "You've wasted your time," right? So let's see, here's some fun quotes. Chapter 2, the world was to me a secret which I desired to divine. He thinks about trying to crack the secret of the whole world, of all existence, right? Very, very ambitious. One of the big things that leads to, for tragic heroes, the downfall, right? This is hubris or overweening pride. It was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn. Also chapter 2, he wants to know what God knows. He has all of this interest when he's studying the alchemists in raising ghosts and devils. So he wants power. He's completely obsessed with the lightning destroying the tree. He wants the power of Zeus. He wants this destructive power. He wants to know how to harness it for himself. Here is a really cool one, or it's not cool at all. This is a really uncool thing. What is Victor's younger brother named? Oh, you don't know? Well, that's because he didn't mention it. At one point when he's describing his family, he says that there was a second son born who is 7 years his younger. That is Ernest Frankenstein. So when Victor's telling the story of his family, he mentions that he has a younger brother, but he doesn't even bother saying what this kid's name is. Now, this could be sibling rivalry. Basically, Victor may be furious that his parents had other kids beside him. He doesn't tell us Ernest's name. All we know is that there's another kid 7 years younger than him. That's all we've heard about this guy until Elizabeth sends the letter. And then we learn that he's going to go into the army and stuff. But Ernest does even better than William. We don't learn about William until chapter 6 when when Elizabeth brings him up and says that he has like a pretty girlfriend or pretty bride, that this little kid is like basically picking up other little 4 and 5-year-old kids and, playing house and all that kind of stuff. So, Victor doesn't even bother telling us that he has 2 younger brothers. He only mentions one, doesn't give that one a name, and then doesn't even mention the existence of the youngest, cutest Frankenstein. Probably because the youngest, cutest Frankenstein is his chief competition, right? Everybody would be way more interested in the cute little kid than the awkward teenager who's busy watching trees explode and reading goth books about how to raise the dead. Yay. Okay. What else do we know? This tendency he has to speak in hyperbole, I mentioned, no human being could have passed a happier childhood than myself. That's very extreme. Destiny had decreed my utter destruction, chapter 2, that's very extreme. When Victor is interested in learning, he says that he has a contempt for the uses of modern natural philosophy, basically because all people are trying to do is understand how plants work and how chemistry works. He prefers alchemists who sought immortality and power, right? He's very into applied science. He's not so much into pure science where you're just trying to understand science for science's sake. He's very into how can I turn science into power for myself? How can I turn it into immortality? He's not just like doing pure research. He's not trying to expand human knowledge. He wants a breakthrough and he wants power. Why this desire for power? Why not this desire to do good for mankind? Let's see here. Some more stuff where he compares himself to God. I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. It kind of reflects the language of God creating us out of nothing or creating us out of clay. I doubted at first whether I should attempt the creation of a being like myself or one of simpler organization. He says that in chapter 4. Shortly after, he says, I resolved to make the being of a gigantic stature, that is to say, about 8 feet in height and proportionably large. So his first one, can I actually make someone like myself or should I make something simpler? Well, the desire to create a being in his own image is what God does for us, right? God created us in his own image. So there's a desire to be like God. And then his vision of himself, he says that it's like easier to make a very large creature, but I think he's trying to make something that's this beautiful colossus to himself, a statue commemorating the greatness of Victor Frankenstein. So when he goes to make a creature in his own image, he makes an 8-foot tall creature, right? Because this is how he sees himself, as this giant among us puny human beings. More fun. How about this? Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds, which I should first break through and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. Victor wants to say, let there be light and bring light into the darkness, just like God. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Ooh, he wants to be God again. Many happy, excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. Wow. So that sounds very Oedipal toward his dad, right? No, if he's in competition with his own father, no father could deserve the gratitude that I would get from my creature, right? As much as I would. That means that my dad doesn't actually deserve my gratitude more than my creature would deserve my gratitude. Okay. Pursuing these reflections, I thought that if I could bestow animation upon lifeless matter, I might in process of time, although I now found it impossible, renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. So he wants the power to raise the dead. Who else had that power? Jesus, right? So Victor is trying to take the place of God. This is the size of his narcissism. This is the size of his hubris. What's really funny to me about this last one, do you remember, Victor says this is what children owe their parents, right? He says, A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy, excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. Pursuing these, so he says that. But in chapter 1, when he was talking about how parents should behave toward children, he says, I was their plaything and their idol, and something better, their child, the innocent and helpless creature, there's that word creature again, bestowed on them by heaven, whom to bring up good, and whose future lot it was in their hands to direct to happiness or misery, according as they fulfilled their duties toward me. This is really disturbing. Okay, so if Victor is the kid, what are kids owed? He should be their plaything and their idol, and that it's a parent's job to bring them up good and to devote themselves to the happy future of the child. But if Victor is the parent instead of the child, then suddenly it becomes the child's responsibility to worship the parent like a god. So if you're the kid and you're Victor, your parents should worship you like a god. And if you are the creator like Victor, then your children should worship you like a god. So it's not really that here's the responsibility that parents are all supposed to flock to, and here are the responsibilities that children are all supposed to flock to. Really, it's that the whole world is just supposed to flock to Victor, right? Whatever your relationship is, go with the thing that entails worshiping Victor. Very, very narcissistic, creepy person. He says he makes it clear when he's talking about his own parents, what parents should do. He doesn't do any of that for his own creation, right? He sits back and can't even deal with the creature that he's made. And I wonder about this. Why is it that Victor, when the creature is not yet alive, Victor finds him beautiful, but as soon as he opens his eyes and convulses, Victor's horrified. Is this competition for Victor? Is it that suddenly he sees the reality of the horrible thing that he's done? Is this Mary Shelley's anxiety over childbirth? But let's talk about this concept of dissociation. So dissociation is this tendency that some people have to disconnect part of their consciousness, to basically live their lives without a full comprehension of what's going on. Sometimes people will go on a dissociative fugue, like they'll forget who they are, and they'll go on a trip and they'll end up like kind of starting a new life, but they won't remember who they are. Sometimes we just blank out on things or black out on things that we don't want to deal with. Freud might have called this repression, but we see very frequently that Victor is kind of always on the verge of breaking up, that he does not have a well-integrated ego. When he sees the world, he doesn't see it in its entirety. He has a very fragmented vision. And I hope this will be a little bit more clear as I go through some of the quotes. One thing that you'll notice is Victor, when he talks about other people, frequently talks about them in terms of body parts. He doesn't talk about a human being in its completeness. He sees little images, right? When he talks to Robert Walton in the letters, he says, "Unhappy man, do you share my madness? Have you drunk also of the intoxicating draught? Hear me, let me reveal my tale, and you will dash the cup from your lips." So he's thinking about like Walton in terms of his lips, not in terms of him as a whole person. And maybe it sounds like I'm stretching, but this continues. Look at how he describes Elizabeth. The saintly soul of Elizabeth shone like a shrine-dedicated lamp in our peaceful home. Her sympathy was ours, her smile, her soft voice, the sweet glance of her celestial eyes. So her smile, her voice, the sweet glance of her celestial eyes were ever there to bless and animate us. She was the living spirit of love to soften and attract. I might have become sullen in my study, rough through the ardor of my nature, but that she was there to subdue me to a semblance of her own gentleness. A semblance is an appearance, right? So he kind of takes on this look that she has as a result of standing near her. I defy you to find any spot in the first section of Frankenstein where he actually says anything about what she likes to do, what her personality is like, what her hobbies are, what her concerns are, what her anxieties are. He never talks about what's going on in her heart. She's always just kind of this gentle present nearby. She's a lot more like a very beautiful lamp than she is a human being, the way Victor describes her. She's a reflection of his mother. She smiles, she's kind, but there's no real description of her character. And this isn't something he is exclusive about. Like if you look at Clerval, you might think if he describes Elizabeth that way, that Clerval, you wouldn't know much about him either. But he talks all about how Clerval loves putting on plays, how he's interested in understanding people's emotions, how he's, he understands who Clerval is. He just doesn't really think about Elizabeth other than as this this vision, this lamp, this comforting presence. It's very strange. So there's this tendency where he just doesn't view things completely. What else can we say? When his mother dies, listen to how he is avoiding talking about his own feelings. This part to me is very sad. One of the few spots where I really, really feel bad for Victor. It's not that he lost his mom. It's that he has no way of processing like having an honest emotional reaction to his own mother's death. Everything in this passage is about bottling it up and transferring, instead of talking about what his feelings are, talking about what one feels, right? This isn't how I feel. This is how one feels, right? And what's the purpose? What's the point in talking about how one feels? So listen carefully to this. I need not describe the feelings of those whose dearest ties are rent by that most irreparable evil, the void it presents itself to the soul, and the despair that is exhibited on the countenance. This is weird, right? I don't need to describe the feelings of people who have experienced this irreparable evil of death. I don't need to talk about what happens to the soul. I don't happen to talk about what happens to the face. Right? He's dissociating again. Oh, here is what happens to the face, right? Not here's what happened to me. And he's talking about one, right? He's talking about what happens to other people. It is so long before the mind can persuade itself, not before I, right? The mind can persuade itself that she whom we saw every day and whose very existence appeared a part of our own can have departed forever, that the brightness of a beloved eye, just an eye, right? He talks in terms of body parts. It's not surprising on some level that he digs up body parts from graves, because every time he talks about other people, it's an eye, it's a lip, it's a mind, it's a heart, it's arms. It's never just the person. Yeah, creepy stuff. What else? That the brightness of a beloved eye can have been extinguished, and the sound of a voice so familiar and dear to the ear can be hushed, never more to be heard. These are the reflections of the first days. Wait, what? These are the reflections of the first days. He's not saying this is how I felt at first, but these are one's reflections, right? He's not talking about his feelings, he's dissociating. But when the lapse of time proves the reality of the evil, then the actual bitterness of grief commences. So grief commences. I don't feel grief. Grief commences. He's talking about these as if they're universal processes that he is not personally experiencing. I hope I'm making this idea clear, this dissociation. Yet from whom has not that rude hand rent away some dear connection? And why should I describe a sorrow which all have felt and all must feel? Why? Because you're feeling it. You lost your mother. Cry. Feel bad about it. It's important. You need to grieve. If Victor could grieve right here, if he could understand what he's really experiencing, and if he could process the love that's all around him, maybe his recourse wouldn't be to reanimate the dead. Maybe it would be to heal. Do you guys catch the difference here? And this is one of the very frightening things about Mary Shelley's view of science, I think. It's really that we have these feelings that we don't realize we have. We don't permit ourselves to feel. And then we go off on what we believe are these rational pursuits where we're going to fix society's problems and we give maybe some lip service to the problem, like the problems we may introduce into the world by creating these new technologies, but we don't really pay attention to them. We don't really think how we're going to radically shift the way reality works. We think we're being very rational. What we're really trying to do is solve some sort of personal problem that we haven't dealt with on an emotional level. If Victor has more self-knowledge, if Victor understands more about his own family history, if he can understand more about who he is as a person, why he thinks the way that he thinks, what his strengths and his flaws are, this would create a very well-balanced person who might be able to use science for the benefit of mankind. Instead, he wants to cure death so that he can be more like God and not have to deal with his mother's own death. And he wants to create a race of beings who will worship him, which is not noble at all, right? So driven by insecurity and a fear of death, this is what Victor unleashes on the world. But he's convinced himself that what he's going to do is make the world a better place for everybody. He's so ill-equipped to do this that he can't even deal with it when his monster comes to life. He can't be a father to his own creation, yet he's going to be the savior of mankind. Very, very disturbing. Another quote here, chapter 4. I do not ever remember to have trembled at a tale of superstition or to have feared the apparition of a spirit. Darkness had no effect upon my fancy, and a churchyard was to me merely the receptacle of bodies deprived of life, which, from being the seat of beauty and strength, had become food for the worm. We should, as we go into a churchyard, feel a sense of happiness for people who are in heaven, sorrow for our own loss, maybe a little bit of melancholy for the passage of time. We should probably be inspired to pray. We should be afraid of corpses because they're horrifying. We should be afraid of ghosts because they're scary, right? Victor doesn't have any of these feelings, right? He's basically like just, I'm gathering raw materials for my new project. It's dissociation again. He's just not connecting normal human experience to what he's doing. He goes 2 years without putting without feeling anything a normal person should feel if he or she were engaged in trying to resurrect like dead body parts, right? He's somehow disconnected from basic human feeling here. Very big problem with dissociation. What else does he say? I seem to have lost all soul or sensation, but for this one pursuit. So he's even aware of his own dissociation. Maybe the whole issue when the monster moves its eye, maybe the freaky thing for him there is that suddenly he has to look the creature in the eye. And looking the creature in the eye is a lot more than looking just the creature in the eye. It's looking how he spent his 2 years in the eye. It's looking at his anxieties that drive him to this excessive pride and this dabbling in the dark arts and dabbling in like this desire to be God. Dabbling in the pain of his mother's loss and the strangeness of his attraction to her as it manifests in Elizabeth. All of this stuff, maybe that's the whole thing, that what Victor is doing is looking at himself as he looks at the monster, and this is the terrifying thing. And this is where he passes out immediately and goes into a trance-like state while the monster goes off and does other stuff that you'll learn about soon. But, maybe we're even seeing a shift of the psyche where perhaps like the monster is the dream and Victor is the dreamer, or maybe Victor is the dream and the monster is the dreamer, right? But we have this weird sort of like dream-like transferring of consciousness as Victor basically falls unconscious from facing the monster coming to life and what it all represents. All right, my last thing that I want to talk about here. Oh, wow, I've given you guys about an hour. Nice work. Okay, so Asexual reproduction. This part is very interesting to me. It's not necessarily a Freudian thing, but there is this strange sort of thing where Victor wants to be both the male and the female when it comes to creating life. So, chapter 5, the rain pattered dismally against the panes. Whenever we see water in novels and poetry, they symbolize new life, new birth, right? We always the raindrops symbolize new life. And so a lot of people look at this part as the water is breaking, that Victor is giving birth, symbolically speaking. And this is the moment where the monster is born through a type of birth. In the movies, we always see all this electrical equipment and Victor yelling, "It's alive," and all that kind of stuff. None of that's mentioned in the book. It's just that at one moment, Victor's working and then the monster's eye opens and Victor flips out, right? He's not all proud of his creation. He just has like somatic symptom disorder and passes out. Okay, so here's what he says about the monster. His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful, great God. His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. So this is very strange. I wonder to some extent if what Victor is experiencing here is postpartum depression, symbolically speaking. Is Victor going through like some sort of hormonal change, metaphorically speaking, where he sees the child and immediately feels like only bad things are going to come of it? Does he move into this type of depression that might be a parallel to postpartum depression? We have to remember that when Mary Shelley was born, her birth was the source of Mary Wollstonecraft's death. Mary Wollstonecraft died of an infection a few days after giving birth to Mary Shelley. So for Mary Shelley, she thinks of birth and death being tied up very closely. Also, she had a miscarriage, and little Clara Shelley, she died, I think it was 7 days after she was born, and she was born prematurely. So Mary Shelley had this strong connection between the idea that birth and death are interlinked. She carried around with her a lot of guilt over little Clara's demise, and I think she also felt that Percy Shelley didn't really mourn Clara enough, that Percy was just kind of off, like, partying or taking care of his other issues and not very attentive to Mary after the birth, or to what was happening to poor little Clara. So it might be that this kind of tendency for Percy to be a little bit of an absentee father early on, that might be connected to Victor Frankenstein too. Also, it's very strange. You guys will catch this later, but William, what a weird thing to name William Frankenstein when you have anxiety about your children dying, right? We know that Mary Shelley named Will Mouse, little William, after her father, William Godwin, but Mary Shelley's, her scientist's little brother, the cute little William Frankenstein. Is this supposed to be anxiety toward Godwin? Is this supposed to be anxiety about her own child? Strange kind of stuff, but we get some interesting connections here between birth and disaster and depression, largely because of Mary Shelley's own life. What else do we have here? It's interesting that right after the monster comes to life, Victor collapses, and then there's this idea that maybe he conceives the child in his imagination, the child being the creature, and then gives birth to him. And then we get this image of Victor lying on the bed, and the monster hovers over him at his legs and stares at him. And there's kind of this positioning, right? If Victor's here and the monster's here, of Victor looking up to see the child after it's delivered. So I think the arrangement of that scene is very indicative of something like childbirth, not just a scientific creation of a child, but, you know, Victor being the mother in this situation. Victor basically being all wet and sweaty and exhausted and broken after the monster comes to life. This is a lot more like a mother going through hard labor than it is a scientist flipping a switch, which is what we normally see, right? There's a lot here that's very feminine and very rooted in the experience of giving birth in the delivery of the monster into the world. Oh, and then the last thing. So I've talked a little bit about Coleridge. We've got to remember when Mary Shelley was a little kid, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who wrote the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is quoted twice. You know, this is the second, chapter 5 is the second time we see it quoted. She would have known Coleridge. Coleridge would have probably been, he might have even have been Uncle Coleridge, right? You know, like William Godwin had all these intellectuals hanging around at the house all the time, and Coleridge was one of them. So when we look at how frequently Mary Shelley quotes the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and even how the whole plot of Frankenstein is modeled after the plot of Rime of the Ancient Mariner, right? In which a person breaks his connection to nature and then has to pay the consequences, right? The plot of both of them. It's interesting that she quotes Coleridge. You know, he would have been just one of her dad's buddies. She obviously knows the Mariner inside and out. But Victor says that after he runs away and then returns home and the creature is gone, he has no idea where the creature goes. He says that he feels like one who on a lonely road doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned round walks on, and turns no more his head, because he know a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. I think about this possibly as postpartum depression. I can't look back. I can't look at what's happened. I can't face this birth that I've just created, because this horrible thing might be chasing after me. It might be behind me, right? I cannot look backward. And this is basically Victor's response, right, to fall unconscious. You know, Clerval sees him out on the street, brings him back home, and then Clerval has to raise him back to health for months afterward. It's funny to me that when Clerval has finally helped him back to health, and Victor's talking again, you know, Clerval says, well, if you're feeling better, do you think maybe you could answer something or could you do something for me? And Victor's like, oh no, he knows. He's like, oh, could you write your parents and let them know they're okay? Could you write to Elizabeth? And his response is, oh, how could you not assume that my first response wouldn't be to write those people who I so dearly love? Well, he can assume it because you haven't done it in years, right? It's been 2 years since you've sent a message home. So that narcissism, the sense at the end maybe where he wants to kind of return to his life beforehand and take that a little bit more seriously rather than face the life that he's dealing with now. This is all pretty interesting stuff to me. Anyways, I hope that this kind of reading can guide the next few chapters, what we're working on this week, and keep those comments and insights coming on the discussion board. I love them. You guys are doing a great job with this book. If you haven't responded on the board yet, make sure that you do. I'm counting responses toward a quiz assignment or toward a 30-point assignment. You get points every time you post. And if you don't post from like something in there, like like each week, then you won't get full credit. I need you to spread out your responses throughout the book. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your watching this, and thanks for joining me in the underground.